Felix was a small boy with unruly hair that stuck up in all directions and eyes that always seemed to be noticing things no one else could see. He wandered through the streets of his town with a notebook clutched tightly in his hands, full of sketches of stars, strange symbols, and cats in positions that looked almost like they were communicating secret messages. He loved to watch the way the neighborhood cats moved, how they twitched their ears, how their tails curled and flicked as if they had their own hidden language. But when he tried to talk about it or explain what he had seen, the other children would laugh and call him names. They said he was weird, a freak, and nobody wanted to play with someone who spent his afternoons staring at a patch of grass, talking to cats as if they were his equals. Felix did not let the teasing bother him too much, though sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet, he would feel a pang of loneliness, as if the world had forgotten him completely, and he wondered if anyone would ever understand the way his mind worked. His parents tried to comfort him, but even they could not follow the intricate patterns he saw in the stars, or the way he could sense things that had not happened yet. In the small town of Willow Creek, Felix became known as the boy genius who never stopped asking questions about everything, from the flight of birds, to the patterns of clouds, to the strange faint noises he sometimes heard at night in the woods behind his house. Most people avoided him, and whispered about how he would grow up strange and alone. But Felix did not care. He had his notebooks, his cats, and the endless curiosity that made the ordinary seem one rainy afternoon. Felix decided to explore the attic of his old creaky house, a place he had never dared to go alone before. The attic smelled of dust and old wood, and the faint hint of mothballs and sunlight barely filtered through the small, grimy window. He climbed the ladder carefully, with his notebook tucked under his arm as if it were a treasure waiting to be protected. As he stepped onto the floorboards, he noticed strange shapes and forgotten objects piled high in corners, old trunks and boxes covered in cobwebs and layers of memories from generations long past. His curiosity pushed him deeper into the shadows, where a faint glow caught his eye. A small chest tucked behind a pile of blankets shone with a soft, pulsating light. Felix's heart beat faster, and he approached, slowly, wondering what could be hidden inside. His fingers trembled as he lifted the lid and discovered a notebook unlike any he had ever seen. Its cover was a deep, shimmering blue that seemed to ripple as he touched it, and the pages were filled with symbols that danced and shimmered as if alive. Each symbol looked like a mixture of letters, paw prints, and strange, curving lines that seemed to move when he blinked. Felix gasped and sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing the symbols with his fingertips. He could feel a strange warmth and a strange energy radiating from the pages, and a thrill ran through his body as if the notebook had been waiting just for him. He opened the first page and noticed that the symbols were arranged in sequences and patterns that seemed familiar and yet impossibly alien. He tried to speak them aloud, and the sounds that came out of his mouth were odd yet musical, like tiny chimes and soft clicks that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He turned page after page, his imagination running wild, as he realized that this was not just a notebook. This was a key, a puzzle, a map to something extraordinary, and perhaps something otherworldly. Felix felt a surge of excitement and determination as he carried the notebook to his desk and began to sketch, copy, and analyze every symbol. He compared them to the sketches in his old notebook, noticing similarities that made his mind spin with possibilities. He imagined the cats of his neighborhood pausing to watch him as if they understood the importance of his discovery, and he wondered if they had been trying to tell him something all along. He stayed in the attic for hours, sometimes forgetting to eat or drink, completely absorbed in the glowing pages and the patterns that seemed to whisper secrets only he could hear. Outside, the rain poured harder, and the wind rattled the window panes, but inside, Felix felt a bubble of calm and exhilaration. He was no longer just a boy who drew strange symbols. He was an explorer, an inventor, a translator of a language that might connect him to a world nobody else even knew existed. His mind raced with questions about who had made the notebook, why it was left behind, and what the cats had to do with it. He made a new promise to himself that he would unlock every secret, every sound, and every symbol, no matter how long it took, and he would prove that his curiosity and his strange way of seeing the world were not foolish, but the beginning of something remarkable. With the glowing notebook open in front of him, Felix felt as if the attic had transformed into a portal, into a universe of mysteries and possibilities, and he could hardly wait to take the first step into the adventure that awaited him. Extraordinary. One afternoon, as he sat on the curb, drawing a particularly complicated sequence of symbols that he thought might represent a conversation between two cats, The older children came by, they laughed and pointed at his messy notebook, telling him he was wasting his time and that he would never amount to anything. Felix tried to ignore them, but one of them knocked the notebook from his hands and it landed in a puddle soaking several pages. The children laughed harder and ran off, leaving Felix sitting on the wet curb staring at his ruined drawings and feeling a mix of anger and determination rise inside him. He scooped up the pages and held them close, knowing that his ideas were important even if nobody else could see it. That night, he lay in bed thinking about the patterns he had seen that day, about the way the cats had looked at him, as if they understood more than any human could, and he made a promise to himself that he would figure out the secret no matter how long it took. He dreamed of mysterious glowing symbols and distant stars and feline creatures with eyes that shone like lanterns in the dark. He imagined talking to them, laughing with them, sharing secrets that no one else could even imagine, and the fire of possibility in his heart grew stronger. Each day he went back to the streets, to sketch, to observe, and to listen, knowing that every look, every sound, every twitch of a cat's tail might be a clue to something bigger, something that would one day make all the laughter seem foolish, and make the world see what he had known all along, that curiosity and intelligence could open doors that no one else even knew existed. Night fell over Willow Creek and Felix sat at his small wooden desk in his bedroom. The glowing notebook open in front of him, surrounded by stacks of paper pencils and a tangle of wires and small electronic devices he was completely absorbed in, the symbols, copying them, drawing them, tracing the lines with his fingers, murmuring the strange musical sounds that seemed to echo softly in the quiet room. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver patterns across the floor and illuminating the sketches that covered his walls. His room looked like a laboratory and a secret library combined, a place where ordinary rules did not apply, and imagination and curiosity ruled supreme. Felix had barely eaten all day and had forgotten to answer his mother's calls, but he did not care. His mind was racing with possibilities, each symbol a clue, each sound a piece of a puzzle that no one else could see or hear. He tried different sequences, repeating clicks, meows, and hums that felt like a language waiting to be spoken. He recorded them on small devices and listened to the playback over and over, comparing them to the patterns in the notebook. Each attempt brought him closer, and yet the puzzle was still just beyond his reach, making him more determined than ever. The neighborhood cats had started to gather outside his window, sitting silently on the ledges and fence posts, watching him as if they knew something important was happening, and Felix felt a strange connection with them, as if they were witnesses to his secret work. Sometimes he would catch a flicker of movement and a pair of glowing eyes peering in at him, and it made his heart pound with excitement and a little fear. He began to notice patterns in the cat's behavior, as if their movements mirrored the symbols in the notebook. Their tail flicks, ear twitches and purrs each held a rhythm that seemed to match the sequences. Felix experimented with different ways to imitate the sounds and gestures, and slowly, the cats began responding to him in ways that made him gasp with wonder. Sometimes a cat would tilt its head or step closer, as if acknowledging that he was doing something right, and Felix realized that he was not just playing, he was communicating on some level that no human had ever achieved before. He stayed up all night, hunched over his desk, forgetting about the cold and the hunger. The room filled with the soft scratching of pencil on paper, the hum of his devices, and the occasional low meow from outside. His excitement made it hard to sleep, and yet, when he closed his eyes, he saw the symbols dancing and shifting in his mind, forming patterns that promised answers just around the corner. He imagined traveling to distant worlds, speaking with creatures nobody else had seen, and discovering secrets hidden in the stars and in the small gestures of ordinary cats. His heart swelled with the possibility that this obsession could change everything that people thought they knew about the world and himself. He made a silent vow that he would never stop pursuing the language, and that he would find a way to understand it fully, no matter how long it took or how many nights he spent awake alone with his notebook. He felt alive, as if he had tapped into a hidden stream of knowledge and energy that connected him to something greater, something magical and mysterious. And as the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Felix leaned back in his chair, smiling, exhausted but triumphant, knowing that the journey had only just begun, and that each night from now on would bring him closer to unlocking the ultimate secret hidden within the glowing notebook and the watchful eyes of the cats outside. Felix woke to the soft golden light of morning streaming through his window and the gentle sounds of birds outside, but his mind was already racing with the patterns and sequences from the night before. He carried his notebook carefully, as if it were a treasure, and tiptoed to the backyard where the neighborhood cats were already gathered watching him, with curious eyes. It seemed as if they had been waiting for him, waiting for the moment when he would attempt to speak their secret language. He knelt on the grass and began to hum the soft musical clicks and purrs that he had practiced tirelessly for weeks. At first the cats just tilted their heads and blinked, slowly sizing him up as if deciding whether to trust him or dismiss him as just another human. But Felix did not give up. He repeated the sequences more confidently, matching the rhythm of their tail flicks and ear twitches. Slowly he noticed a change. One small tabby stepped closer and purred in a pattern that seemed to respond to his hum. Felix's heart leaped with excitement. He adjusted his tones, mimicking the purr, and the cat repeated back almost like a question, and he answered back with a series of gentle clicks and hums. The air seemed to shimmer with possibility, and Felix realized that for the first time he was not just making sounds at random, he was having a real interaction with the cats. Each cat began to take turns responding. Felix noted the differences in pitch and rhythm, carefully writing them down in his notebook, comparing them to the glowing symbols he had been studying for so long. He could hardly believe that his practice had actually worked, and that he was beginning to understand their secret communication. The other children in the neighborhood began to notice the gathering of cats and Felix talking, and some of them stopped to watch. They whispered to each other and pointed, laughing at first because it looked so strange seeing a boy kneeling on the grass, speaking in clicks and purrs to a group of ordinary cats. But Felix ignored them completely absorbed in the conversation unfolding before him. One of the larger cats with sleek black fur jumped onto the fence and let out a long melodic purr that matched one of the sequences from the notebook. Felix repeated it perfectly, and the cat lowered its head and nudged his hand as if acknowledging him as an equal. The excitement made his hands shake, and he could feel the energy coursing through his body. He realized that this was no ordinary communication. He was tapping into something deeper, something older and more mysterious than he had ever imagined. He spent hours in the backyard testing sequences, experimenting with tones and gestures, taking notes and recording every response. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, by the time his mother called him for lunch, he barely noticed the world around him. He knew in his heart that he had crossed an invisible boundary that separated human from feline, and that he was on the edge of discovering a language that nobody else had ever been able to speak. The laughter of the other children faded into the background, replaced by the thrill of connection and understanding, and as he looked into the eyes of the cats, Felix felt a spark of triumph and wonder, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the streets of Willow Creek, into worlds that he had only dreamed of. One night, as the sky turned deep indigo and stars glittered like tiny diamonds, Felix sat on his bedroom windowsill, notebook in lap, and eyes scanning the quiet street below. He hummed softly the sequences of clicks and purrs that he had been practicing for weeks, and felt a strange energy vibrating through his fingertips. The neighborhood cats had gathered as usual, but tonight something felt different. There was a stillness in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then out of the shadows, a cat unlike any he had seen before appeared. Its fur shimmered with colors that seemed to shift and ripple like liquid light, and its eyes glowed like two miniature lanterns piercing the darkness. Felix's heart thumped wildly in his chest. He had never seen anything like it, and yet he felt a deep sense of recognition, as if this creature belonged to the same world as the glowing notebook. He whispered softly the sequences he had learned, and to his astonishment, the shimmering cat responded with clicks and purrs that perfectly mirrored the patterns Felix had memorized. It stepped closer onto the windowsill, its paws silent and deliberate, and Felix held his breath as he repeated the sounds again, trying to match them exactly. The cat tilted its head and let out a melodic trill that Felix understood instantly as a greeting, or perhaps a test. He replied with gentle clicks and low hums, his hands shaking with excitement. The exchange continued back and forth, each sound, each gesture creating a rhythm that Felix felt deep in his chest. It was as if the cat was speaking, and he was finally able to answer. He realized that this was the first true conversation he had ever had with a being from another world. His mind raced, imagining where the cat had come from, what it wanted, and why it had appeared. Now the glowing notebook had promised communication, but Felix had never expected it to happen so vividly, so tangibly. Right outside his window, the other cats watched, silently perched on fences and rooftops, as if they were witnesses to an extraordinary event. They seemed to sense that something monumental was unfolding, and their purrs and movements matched to the rhythm of the conversation, adding a layer of harmony. Felix felt like he was standing on the edge of a secret universe and peering into a world that had been hidden from human eyes for centuries. His fingers traced the symbols in the notebook, copying the sounds and gestures so he would not forget a single detail. Every trill, every click, every flick of the cat's tail was recorded in his mind and written down meticulously. He could feel a spark of triumph, excitement, and awe, all at once, knowing that this moment was proof that the hours of study, observation, and practice had not been wasted. This shimmering cat was real, it was communicating, and Felix was the only human capable of understanding it. His heart swelled with the knowledge that he had crossed a threshold that no one else had crossed before, and that the world he had imagined in secret was now tangibly in front of him. He whispered one last sequence as the cat stepped back, its eyes glowing softly, and then leaped silently into the night, leaving Felix trembling with exhilaration and wonder. He knew this encounter was only the beginning, and that the notebook, the symbols, and the cats were guiding him toward discoveries that would change his life forever. Felix could hardly sleep that night, his mind buzzing with the encounter with the shimmering cat. He kept replaying the melodic trills and clicks over and over, imagining the way the cat had tilted its head and responded to his sounds. He knew instinctively that the notebook held the key to fully understanding this alien feline language, and he was determined to decode it completely. He spread all of his papers across the floor, his sketches, his notes, and recordings of the cats, and began to compare the patterns. He noticed that certain sequences of clicks and purrs matched clusters of symbols that seemed to pulse with a strange energy on the pages. Felix experimented with combining sequences and mimicking movements with his hands and his voice, trying to align perfectly with the rhythms he had observed in the cats. Each attempt brought him closer, and yet the complexity of the language fascinated him and challenged him like nothing else he had ever studied. He spent hours practicing intonation and cadence, and sometimes he would stop and listen carefully to the faint sounds of cats outside replying, almost as if they were testing him or guiding him. Felix realized that the notebook was not just a guide. It was a bridge, and he was walking carefully across it toward understanding. The shimmering cat appeared again at his window the next evening, and Felix was ready. He greeted it with the sequences he had perfected, and to his astonishment the cat responded in longer, more complex patterns. Felix felt his heart race as he deciphered the meaning. Almost immediately the cat was asking questions about the world, the streets, the other cats, and even about Felix himself. It was not just communicating, it was curious. It wanted to share knowledge and learn from him too. Felix answered as best as he could, combining clicks, hums, and purrs with gestures and movements that he had observed. The conversation grew richer with each exchange, and Felix felt a surge of exhilaration and confidence, knowing that he was the only human capable of understanding these beings. He began to take notes, more systematically recording questions and answers, patterns, and meanings. He even began sketching the expressions and postures of the cat to match each sequence so he could remember the nuances. The night felt alive with energy, the air vibrating with communication, and Felix could sense that this was only the beginning of a much larger conversation that could connect him to a world he had only dreamed of. He realized that the cats were not ordinary creatures. They were emissaries of a species with knowledge and intelligence far beyond what humans had imagined, and that he had been chosen to understand them. Because of his persistence, his curiosity, and his unique way of seeing the world. Each night, the conversations became longer, more intricate, and Felix felt himself learning faster than he had ever learned anything before. He was not just practicing, he was truly translating and responding. He was building a dialogue that transcended species and worlds. He could hardly wait for the next night, for the shimmering cat to return, and for the new sequences to reveal themselves. He knew that with each interaction he was uncovering secrets that would astonish the world, and that the alien cat language was slowly becoming a bridge between human curiosity and an intelligence that had been quietly observing all along. As the nights passed, Felix found himself growing more confident in the alien feline language. He could now understand subtle differences in purrs, clicks, and trills that indicated questions, commands, or simple observations. The shimmering cat appeared more frequently, and Felix noticed that other cats had begun to approach in smaller groups, observing quietly and occasionally mimicking the sounds or gestures that Felix used. He realized that he was not just communicating with a single cat, he was beginning to understand an entire network of beings who had their own structure, rules, and intelligence. The notebook had become a key, a manual, and a map all at once, showing him how the symbols corresponded to sounds, movements, and even emotions. Felix began to see the logic behind it, the way patterns repeated with slight variations, and the way sequences combined to form meaning. He started organizing his notes, meticulously grouping symbols with their corresponding vocalizations and movements, and testing them with the cats outside. The shimmering cat seemed almost like a teacher, guiding him, testing his understanding, and correcting subtle mistakes through its responses. Felix felt a thrill every time he got a sequence exactly right. It was like unlocking a door that had been closed for centuries. One evening as he practiced, he noticed a pattern in the notebook he had overlooked before, a series of symbols that glowed brighter than the others. When he traced them with his finger, he realized these symbols were instructions not just for communication but for deeper interaction. They described ways to convey concepts, feelings, and even ideas across species boundaries. Felix felt his pulse quicken as he understood that the notebook was left intentionally for someone like him, someone who could perceive these patterns and devote the patience and intelligence to unlock their meaning. He began to imagine the purpose behind the alien cats, their observations, their methods of silently watching humans for years, and how they had created a language complex enough to convey thoughts yet subtle enough to remain hidden. Felix spent the night mapping the new instructions, translating them into sounds, gestures, and visual cues, and testing them with the shimmering cat. It responded with longer sequences than ever before, as if acknowledging that Felix was ready to comprehend more advanced concepts. He realized that this was no longer just about curiosity or play. This was a deliberate system designed to share knowledge across worlds. Felix understood that the alien cats were messengers of a civilization that valued intelligence, curiosity, and careful observation, and that he had been chosen because of his persistence, his love for learning, and his ability to notice details that others overlooked. He felt a surge of awe and responsibility, knowing that the notebook had guided him to this point, and that the shimmering cat and its companions were willing to teach him secrets that could alter humanity's understanding of the world and the universe. Felix vowed silently that he would continue studying, practicing, and observing, that he would honor the trust of these beings, and that he would decipher every remaining symbol so that one day he could share the knowledge with humans in a way that would bridge the gap between species and worlds. The air around him seemed to vibrate with anticipation as he traced the final glowing symbol for the night, and he knew, deep in his heart, that he had crossed a threshold that no human had crossed before, and that the journey ahead would reveal truths more extraordinary than he had ever imagined. Word of Felix's strange talent began to spread quietly. At first, a neighbor saw him communicating with the cats, and told another who told another, and soon curious people were gathering around the edges of his backyard, whispering and peeking over fences to watch the boy genius speak in clicks, hums, and purrs that somehow drew responses from the neighborhood cats. Felix noticed the change immediately. The laughter and mockery that had followed him for years was replaced by wide-eyed curiosity and cautious amazement. He welcomed them hesitantly, at first unsure how they would react when they saw him interacting with the shimmering cat and the other feline observers, but he soon realized that the world was ready to witness something extraordinary. People arrived with cameras, notebooks, and questions, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious language in action. Scientists from nearby towns came bringing their own instruments and theories, and Felix felt a thrill of excitement mingled with nervousness as he prepared to demonstrate what he had worked on tirelessly for months. The cats seemed to sense the new audience and formed a loose circle around him on fences, rooftops, and in the garden, watching intently as if protecting the sanctity of the communication. Felix began by humming a familiar sequence, and the shimmering cat responded perfectly, followed by the tabbies and calicos, each adding variations and nuances that Felix translated with clicks and gestures. He demonstrated how different sequences conveyed questions, statements, and even small stories. The onlookers were astonished, whispering among themselves, some taking notes, others simply staring in awe. It was unlike anything they had ever witnessed in their lives. Felix explained how the notebook had guided him, how observation, patience, and practice had allowed him to decode the complex patterns, and how the cats were intelligent beings, capable of understanding and responding to human sounds and gestures. The scientists were amazed, taking careful measurements, recording every response, while the townspeople murmured in disbelief and admiration. They realized that the boy they had once mocked had unlocked a secret that connected them to a hidden intelligence that had quietly observed their world for decades. Some Children who had teased Felix now looked at him with wide eyes, some feeling embarrassed and others fascinated by the magic they had never understood before. Felix felt a mixture of pride and humility as he saw the impact of his work. He knew that this was only the beginning, that the notebook and the cats had much more to teach, and that the world was only beginning to glimpse the possibilities of this extraordinary connection. As the sun began to set and the cats returned to their quiet corners, Felix continued to communicate, recording sequences, translating gestures, and answering questions from the curious crowd. He felt exhilarated knowing that the secret he had nurtured alone in his room and backyard was now being shared and appreciated. The laughter had vanished, replaced by awe, wonder, and respect, and Felix realized that his persistence, his intelligence, and his ability to see what others could not had transformed him from a boy who was ridiculed into someone who could bridge worlds and reveal secrets that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries. He felt a quiet satisfaction as he watched the shimmering cat leap gracefully into the shadows, knowing that their lessons were ongoing and that the world was ready to pay attention at last. Felix had become the center of attention in Willow Creek, and the boy who was once mocked and ignored now walked with a quiet confidence that radiated from his every movement. The cats seemed to recognize the change in him, gathering around his home and garden, as if acknowledging his new status and his ability to communicate with their kind. Felix continued to study the notebook and practice the sequences, perfecting the language until he could understand subtle inflections and gestures that conveyed emotions, complex ideas, and even humor. He spent long hours translating conversations between the cats, noting their reactions, and interpreting the hidden wisdom they shared. Felix knew that this knowledge was extraordinary, and that it held the power to change how humans viewed animals. Communication and intelligence word spread far beyond the small town, and soon researchers, journalists, and curious visitors arrived from distant places, hoping to witness the boy genius in action. Felix welcomed them patiently, showing them how he had decoded the symbols, how he practiced tirelessly, and how the cats responded with remarkable understanding. He demonstrated sequences that conveyed stories, histories, and questions, and allowed the visitors to witness the shimmering cat respond with trills, clicks, and tail gestures that seemed to answer with intelligence and intention. The people were astonished, whispering to one another, taking careful notes, and recording the moments on cameras and devices. They marveled at the depth of connection Felix had achieved, and at the patience, curiosity, and brilliance that had enabled him to unlock the alien feline language. Even those who had once teased him or dismissed his interests now approached with respect and admiration. Some children who had laughed at him eagerly asked questions, hoping to learn his methods, and Felix answered them with a gentle smile, encouraging their curiosity. He realized that his journey had become more than a personal achievement. It was a demonstration that intelligence, perseverance, and imagination could break barriers and connect worlds that seemed entirely separate. The cats themselves seemed to celebrate the moment, purring in harmonious patterns and moving gracefully as if performing a quiet ritual of approval. Felix felt a warm glow of satisfaction and pride, knowing that the bond he had nurtured with the shimmering cat and its companions had endured the test of skepticism, ridicule, and doubt. He could now converse freely with them, understanding messages that spanned from simple observations to complex concepts that hinted at a broader universe of knowledge waiting to be explored. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Felix stood surrounded by cats, humans, and notebooks, feeling a sense of completeness. He knew that his work was far from finished, that there were still secrets to uncover, sequences to translate, and ideas to share, but he also understood that he had proven something vital about curiosity, courage, and the power of persistence. The boy who had once been laughed at was now celebrated and respected. The townspeople marveled at the transformation and at the incredible intelligence and dedication that had led to it. Felix smiled, watching the shimmering cat leap into the fading light, its eyes glowing softly, and he felt a deep sense of connection, gratitude, and triumph. He had unlocked a language that bridged worlds, shown humanity the wonders hidden in plain sight, and demonstrated that even the smallest curious minds could achieve the extraordinary. And as night fell over Willow Creek, the cats purred around him, and Felix knew that this was only the beginning of a lifetime filled with discovery, wonder, and connection.